Hi everybody, my name is Trista.
I'm Sara.
And today we're going to talk to you about a strategy called functional communication training.
So most of the problem behavior we see is an individual's way to try and communicate their wants and needs.
Yeah, and so in a way to kind of remediate or help with that, one thing we can do to try to reduce unwanted problem behavior is use this strategy called functional communication training, which is a way to teach a student a request that will encourage him to use the request rather than engage in problem behavior.
So the first step to using functional communication would be to conduct a functional behavior assessment. And this will tell us really why the behavior is occurring or what the student's trying to communicate.
Exactly. And when you're setting this up, you're going to want to look at what are the student's strengths? How can we take what that student currently does really well and build on that to teach him or her a request?
So some important things to remember with functional communication is we want the request to be easier for the student to use than the problem behavior was.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because if the problem behavior gets the student what he or she wants more often or easier or faster or in a better quality, the student is just going to continue to display the problem behavior. So it does have to be easier. And it has to work out for the student. So when the student uses their request, it has to work out. It has to get them what that student wants.
Right. And speaking of that, we want the request to work out with anyone the student uses the request with.
Mm-hmm.
So if the student uses the request on a staff that hasn't been trained in functional communication, they'll still be able to honor it.
Because you want that to generalize or transfer across different environments or different people in a way that it really does improve the quality of life for that student and in as many different situations as possible. So maybe we could use an example to kind of illustrate this strategy.
Yeah. Let's say we have Kyle, a third grader, who scores the same as his peers academically, but maybe struggles behaviorally.
Yeah, so let's say, for example, that Kyle displays problem behavior in the form of, a refusal. So maybe he's putting his head on his desk or swiping items off of the table, potentially even becoming aggressive with other people, staff members in the room, when presented with different antecedents or triggers, such as a presentation of a writing task or being told to transition to an academic task.
Yep, so along with that, we also want to look at what's following the problem behavior. So what's the consequence he's getting out of it? In this case, it's maybe staff are providing him help or removing the task altogether when problem behaviors occur.
Mm-hmm. So what we'll want to do is, if we select that functional communication training is a good strategy, what we'll want to do next is figure out what are his strengths. So in the case of Kyle, he has good verbal communication skills. So in that case, I think we'd use a request that's verbal. So teaching him to request verbally, can I have a different activity? Can I do a different type of work? Will you help me?
I think that's a good example because it first off is just as easy for him, if not easier, to use than problem behavior.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one that will generalize to everyone.
Absolutely. So what you can do is you can train the staff that work with Kyle to, when they present the trigger, right, here's a task demand or let's transition to work, you can have staff prompt that functional communication. So remember, Kyle, here's writing. If you wanted to do something else, you could ask me, can we write on a whiteboard instead?
And we'll want to make sure when we're teaching this response that we're honoring it every single time it's displayed.
Mm-hmm.
And we're also not honoring the problem behavior.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And sometimes that's hard for staff because you feel like, well, Kyle's just going to do what he wants all day, every day, and he's going to manipulate us into getting what he wants.
Mm-hmm.
That's hard for staff, but really what we need to remember is that if Kyle can just choose his problem behavior, and his problem behavior will get him out of work, right? Because you can't engage in problem behavior, that refusal or that aggression at the same time as work. If he has that choice, he's going to just use problem behavior if his request doesn't work. So I think what I hear you saying, Sara, is that when we're first starting the program, every time they use that request, or every time Kyle uses that request, we'll want to immediately remove work or immediately give him a different activity, whatever it is he requests, every single time, even if it's all day, until we've reduced the problem behavior to a level where we feel that that's okay for him. And so most of the time we'll want that to be almost not engaging in problem behavior at all, or near zero levels. Then what would we do once that happens, Sara?
So the next step, once problem behavior is at minimal levels, we would be able to start building in tolerance for, delays to the outcome they're looking for. So if they request a different activity, you could say, let's do this one problem, and then we can switch to your activity.
That's a perfect example. And then you start to make that a little bit harder over time until eventually you've really faded out the program to where it can be manageable, and he can use that in every area of his life. So what we're first going to show you is how the problem behavior looked if I were Kyle and this were my teacher, and the task was presented and what they found in that functional behavior assessment.
Okay, here's your work, Kyle.
I'm not doing this work. That is stupid.
Why don't you take a break and we'll try this
I'm
later.
going to take a break. Okay, so that would just be one behavior episode that we might have recorded in that functional behavior assessment process. So now let's say we found a trend and we found what we told you earlier. And in this situation, we're going to demonstrate what starting functional communication might look like.
So I would present the task and remind you, hey, if you need a break, you let me know.
Okay. Can I just take a break?
Yes, thanks for letting me know.
Okay. So in that situation, the trigger that commonly caused problem behavior was presented. And Sara did a really nice job of just reminding me that I can use that request. Not every time the student will use the request, and that's great, because then you can reward the fact that I completed my work. But in that situation, I didn't want to do work, and in the past I would have just used problem behavior, so I did use that request, and it worked out for me right away. So that's great. That's exactly how functional communication training should look.
Okay, so now we're going to show you what to do when you're running functional communication training, but you do come across problem behavior. Okay, Kyle, let me know if you need a break. Here's your work.
I hate this work. I'm not ever doing this for you ever again. I hate school.
Okay, I'll wait.
Okay, I'll just do the first problem. That's all I'm going to do is one problem.
And let me know if you need a break.
Okay. Can I take a break? I don't want to do the problem.
Yes, thanks for letting me know. So this strategy also works for students who are nonverbal or communicate differently. So in this example, we will use a break card instead of the verbal request for a break or a different task. Okay, match. Break.